NIH are named for members of my family, for Eunice Shriver and my aunt, my grandmother. So, I said to him, Tony, you've been telling people I'm a liar. When I say no vaccine has ever been, none of the mandated vaccines, what they call recommended, they're actually mandated in many of the states. I said none of them have ever been tested against in a placebo-controlled trial in a safety test prior to licensure. And I said, can you show me one vaccine that has been subject to a safety test? Show me one study that shows that. And he made it this show of looking through a red well. They had brought in from NIH this big tray full of file folders, and he made a show of kind of looking through that at the time, but he couldn't find whatever he was looking for. So then he said, it's back at NIH in Bethesda, and I'll send it to you. Well, he never did. So Aaron and I sued HHS, and said, show us one study that's ever been done on, pre-licensing safety testing for vaccines. And after a year of stonewalling, they finally gave us a letter and said, we don't have any. So they literally don't have any. So nobody knows what the risk profile for these products are. So they're telling people they avert more harms than they cause. But there's no science behind that statement. It's just it's just a guesswork.
But it's an amazingly effective narrative. And that narrative, the way it's spread through this country, like I said,
yes.
It has gotten me, and I think it gets a lot of people. And that people are terrified of being called an anti-vaxxer. It's a very dismissive pejorative. It's a very bad term. And if someone calls you, like, oh, he's one of those. And it's a kind of amazing what they've done, especially in a world where we're very aware of the side effects that were hidden from the public with other drugs, whether it's opiates or whether it's Vioxx, or we're very aware that deception has taken place.
Yeah, we are. But yet somehow we're not able to ask ourselves in the scientific and mainstream community whether or not that could be happening again. The point is they don't care. Some do, and if they do care, they're called conspiracy theorists. You see how that works out? So people quickly go, oh, I get it. So if I express my opinion about the truth, I'm suddenly not allowed to express it anymore, and I'll be kicked out of the club. So I'll just not say anything. People very quickly realize that. Now people are coming around again to realize, well, I can't just be silent. It's not going away, so I have to speak up. But by the way, we just got censored for the second time while live, by the way. That's now 2 channels.
Getting into the weeds, but alive.
Oh, wait a minute. I guess they brought the other one back. That's now 2 channels. How funny. That's hilarious to me. So this was censored again. Maybe they just realized they can't cut this out. They brought it back. I just think that's hilarious. Well, I just looked and it was down. It said stream down, censored. Then it came back. Now we got it running on 2 channels. So who cares? Screw you too. But let's keep going. Think about how obvious this stuff is, though, guys. What he's discussing is undeniable. Fauci didn't find the thing he was looking for. He lied and never got back to him about it. How do you explain that? Right? They'll lie about, yes, they are. Okay, well, they're not, though. And we can prove that. So at what point did we actually break through with these people? And how many people out there involved in this are somehow unable to ask themselves, could he be right? And this is the kind of lunacy, like a Trump derangement syndrome, but around somebody like RFK. RFK derangement syndrome. That's what we're dealing with. First of all, this doctor just happens to go, really? Seems like an honest question. So am I getting this correctly? She says. Not one vaccine on the market has truly safe profile. None were tested against neutral placebo. Saline, not even one. Is this true? Uh-huh. You could look it up. It's not hard to find out if you actually look at the point is, if you look through the NIH, it might be difficult, but you can find people like RFK this will show you the studies and you will find for yourself. There is no, and then on top of that, ask yourself why it's hard to find. If it was so commonplace, then wouldn't it be all over the NIH? You're not going to find them, guys, because it's not happening. But what's funny is that she follows up and goes, I'm reading the comments about this. And she goes, your response was helpful, but not condescending. I started to block some of the other accounts. So this is somebody who's just trying to go, what do you think? And because it's such an aggressively controlled topic, everybody in here is like attacking her for simply asking a question. You should know better. You're a doctor. Know better than what's correct. You see, people are afraid, desperate to be right, fighting for their 2-party control. But the problem is that people are just lost. This person follows up and says, and this I agree with this, the medical consensus, in quotes, is that doing high-quality double-blind studies on vaccine safety is not ethical because, well, we know vaccines work, so giving some kids a placebo is purposely harming them. Think about the broken logic. That's the same as saying, we got to give them puberty blockers now because if we don't, 20 years from now, it's broken logic. This is like saying we got to give them the injection during COVID because by not giving it them, we're hurting them because COVID. But wasn't the study to find out whether or not? Who cares? COVID. And then you're called irrational for pointing out logic. There's somebody else going, let's not forget that the VAERS system they told us was there for our safety all these years, which nobody can dispute that. All this time. The whole point was VAERS was there to keep you safe. We're watching it. We're watching for signals. Right? But now they scream that it's not valid. We can't consider it. It says it's not valid. Okay, well then either that reveals that they never had a system to keep us safe. Oops. Or they're suddenly dismissing the system that's always been there. Your choice. I think we know it's the latter, but it says, so they gave us untested vaccines with an AE system designed to fail, but pretended it was good enough until they didn't want to acknowledge it. Now, I do think it's the first part that the signal's clear. They're just trying to hide that signal by pretending the system they've always told us is there to keep us safe is no longer valid, even though nothing changed. This is not hard to see. People are scared. And here's the kind of thing we get from a bunch of children out there that this responding to her genuine question. Pretty much everything RFK Jr. says about vaccines is false. He's on a crusade. Evidence be damned. Says the completely evidence-free comment. That's completely false. Everything he says you can prove for yourself. But you see, this is what the people are being told. Good boy, Ryan. You said what you were supposed to say. Have a cracker. That's what's happening. People all around him and go, oh, good job, man. We see it too. This is the fake news progressing past the truth. Not hard to see. That doesn't mean every conspiracy theory is true. The point is that this is not hard to prove. But people like this Ryan Kirk guy and everybody else out there are quick to come in and just scream what they think makes them right. That's happening everywhere. Now, this brings us to the conversation about what's happening with Peter Hotez. And here's Joe Rogan calling him out, which is outstanding because I think Peter Hotez thought he had an ally in Joe Rogan. And Joe Rogan is, at least in this case, showing himself to be more interested in the truth. Now, what's funny is, by the way, he has me blocked, Hotez. Now, I'm realizing it's not even blocked. He's blocked a lot of us, but it seems recently because of this, he's put himself on some kind of, like the bottom line is I can go over to a restricted, like a private page, and it still limits their tweets, but I'm able to find it by other means. So I do have the tweets here. I'll show you in a second, I think right here. But this first one just says, and this is Peter Hotez, basically pretending to engage with this, acting like it's not a fair debate because what you're doing is I think actually was this one. Let's remember what this is about. Not a small number of Americans lost their lives from anti-vaccine disinformation. I mean, again, how can you even quantify that? It's a completely subjective opinion. So because of just this nebulous disinformation that we're going to just say 200,000 people died because of that. And now he's saying because Elon, RFK, they're causing more death and destruction by saying what they're saying. The truth. Obviously, that's my opinion, but I can prove that's correct. But he goes, this is a non-answer. I challenge you publicly because you publicly quote tweeted and agreed with that dog shit Vice article. If you're really serious about what you stand for, you now have a massive opportunity to debate what will reach the largest audience. Now, anybody honest would go, absolutely. Well, again, you could argue their stance is that debating an anti-vaxxer has no merit. Well, if clearly your point is that everyone's believing anti-vaxxers, at what point? That's what Joe Rogan said in an older interview. Shouldn't you take advantage and step up since you claim you're losing? He's dishonest. His arguments have been proven to be false. We just played that great clip by Matt Orfalea where he's lying continually. I've always said it was a 3-dose vaccine. I've always said it was a 4-dose vaccine. I think 5 was always what we were going to go for. Just pathetic. Absolutely ridiculous. He's a clown. That doesn't mean he doesn't have scientific understanding. It doesn't mean he doesn't have credentials. He's still ridiculous. He's a liar. This is not my opinion. He's caught repeatedly lying, at the very least, obfuscating what's currently going on to push the vaccine. Now, the point was, he follows up and says, I saw the tweet you deleted. He says, be serious, Joe. That's what you threw out for hunting buddies on a weekend. First of all, they're offering, he's like, I'll give you $100,000 to any charity you want if you come and debate RFK Jr. And then apparently everyone's chiming in, which I think is kind of silly, to be honest. I was almost going to put a tweet out that was like, I'll add 47 million to that number, seeing as how we all kind of realize that Peter's not going to do this. And everyone's kind of going, I'll add 100,000, I'll add 100,000. Everyone's like, it's up to $1 million now. I think we all know he's not going to do this. And so it's kind of like a false win for people to be like, I'll add my money to that I don't have. Anyway, the point is it's a lot of money circulating, people arguing. And he simply goes, oh, here's the tweet right here. If you're claiming it's misinformation, I'm offering you $100,000 of a charity of your choice to debate him. Anybody serious, I think, would take him up on that offer. But he goes, be serious, Joe. That's what you throw for your hunting buddies on a weekend. That's a pretty disgusting kind of statement. He goes, a $50 million endowment, which you guys can easily afford. Not for me, though, but we can continue low-cost, patent-free vaccines for the world's poor. That's so gross. And that's why he deleted this. So you're asking for more money? That's disgusting. This guy, I just can't get past what this guy gives me a gross feeling in general. That's personal, obviously, but I mean, these people are lying. Now, what's happening actually is he's turning this down. And he has tweets that he already deleted that Joe Rogan already called out, where he's calling these people, he's calling them all fascists. This is just clumsy. I think they realize they're losing the information war. Here's something that just happened that by the way, I do not advocate or support going to people's homes and, this kind of thing, because that will be used against us, whether or not you think it's justified. It will be used against us. And this will be framed as, harassment or terrorist activity. That's what they're going to call it. But either way, I think it's important for the conversation. This person, when I think it's at his home, it caught him off guard and asked him this question. I just think it's interesting the way he responds.
Hey. Oh, are you Peter Hotez?
I am. Hi.
Nice to meet you.
How are you?
Hey. So why are you not going to debate RFK on Joe Rogan's podcast?
Oh, come on. That's harassing.
I'm just curious.
What?
Oh, it's harassing, is it? But, it's not harassing to call us terrorists, to try to put people in prison for claiming that things are right when we know that they're correct and have peer-reviewed science to prove it. Or, all these things are pushing injections that you damn well know are hurting people, right? Oh, but you're harassing me. Again, I'm not advocating for any of this. I just think it's kind of a hypocritical thing to say.
Nothing hostile, just curious.
I haven't said anything one way or the other.
I mean, are you planning on doing it?
He just invited me, so we'll see.
And I think you should, though.
Well, we'll give it some thought.
Okay.
Okay.
And what do you have to say to people who think they were vaccine injured?
Come on.
Anything for them?
Don't come to my house.
I mean, do you have anything to say to people that...
Right. Don't come to my house, right? I mean, but he is personally responsible for people losing jobs, people losing their children. Right? It just seems kind of like all safe behind your gate, right? But you have no problem pushing your ideology and actions on people elsewhere for their opinions based on science.
Do you have anything to say to people? Yeah. I mean, do you think vaccine injuries are real, Peter? Peter, it's just a question.
Interesting. Here is a clip of RFK Jr. addressing specifically Peter Hotez on with Stephen Kirch.
Do you think will happen first? Will Peter Hotez be on VSRF or will Bobby Kennedy be on CNN? Of those two possibilities.
Well, Steve, I don't make predictions. I'm not gonna guess about that, but it's a sad thing. Peter won't come and talk to you, and he won't talk to me. And Joe Rogan has asked him repeatedly, why don't you debate Robert Kennedy? And he says to Joe Rogan, well, he's a cunning lawyer and he knows how to do debates. And I'm not, I'm just a poor, humble physician. And I don't know how to do that.
So ultimately that answer is he'll win. And he's better at debating. Well, that doesn't necessarily sound the way I think he wants it to, right?
But the truth is that the positions he's advocating cannot be defended. And you don't have to be a good debater to punch holes in them. And that's the problem is if you don't talk to people, it's tyranny. It's not democracy. It definitely is not science. Science is about erecting hypotheses and then chipping away at them with new explanations that give better that make more coherent and sensible explanations of the facts as they evolve and as we know them. And you can't just freeze science and say, an expert said this is so, therefore nobody can challenge it for the rest of time. That is not science, that is religion. And, Peter is the high priest of vaccinology. He is not defending science. He's defending religious, faith-based beliefs in a reality that he chooses to believe in, but has no basis in, science or evidentiary or empirical evidence.
You mean, guys, this is the technocratic world. This is what we're talking about. It's a scientific elite. Now, elitists, really, they're not better than you. They think they are, so they're elitists. But the point is, that's what we're staring at. This is a society of people. We've talked about this for a long time. There's been even, I think Jason Burmis and I just talked about Technocracy Inc. And this, the discussion of this movement that came up with, they decided that they should shift from politics into a scientific and engineering elite. They know better than you, right? That's the idea. And you could even possibly argue that it stemmed from something that they something positive. I don't think I agree. I believe that. But maybe at the time they were like, well, we just are like at the time, maybe you could just argue that they realized the politicians were ruining the country. They said, well, scientists are smarter and they have, more objective and blah, blah, blah. But then what happened? Science and all of it got co-opted by the same politics and the same nonsense. The point is that we're watching that thing happen today, where these people are beyond argument, beyond scientific discussion, as they then point at what they nebulously say is the science. And people who are standing up and going, well, let's debate it. Let's talk about this. Not some fringe conspiracy theory in their mother's basement, but a wildly prominent presidential candidate. But yet this guy's like dismissive. I was a random anti-vaxxer. I mean, this is why they're losing control of this, because this is indefensible. It's embarrassing. Now, I recently this was on December 2022. I put this out a while ago. I'm not going to play it again just because it's not worth it. The guy debunks himself. But the point is, here he is on Joe Rogan all the way back then, where he is defending vaccines and pharmaceuticals. But then when Joe asks him basic health questions, he admits he doesn't eat healthy, admits that he doesn't. He's not actually a healthy person. He's overweight. His teeth are brown and disgusting. Now, I'm not saying this to be mean. The point is that this is a problem, guys. This is a guy who is trying to tell you to be healthy by taking things that are chemicals that are hurting your body. When you can prove that people who have teeth like that is dangerous. I'm not being hyperbolic. My mother used to work at a dentist's office. The point is, as a manager, she ran the place. The point is, they understand that these kind of things, gum disease, periodontal disease, this leads to systemic inflammation. It's dangerous. Now, that's not to say that he's necessarily about to die. The point is that shows you an utter lack of understanding or care for general health. But I guess you can just take a vaccine to make your teeth better. No, the point is, vaccines are not the answer. Now, if you want to do it, you think it's right, go ahead. That's your choice. That's my stance and always has been. You can decide for yourself. But a government thinks otherwise. The government must decide for you and tell people like this, or tell you that people like this know better. Right? We can point to the the secretary of the HHS of our country, who is clearly not a healthy person, or the health minister of Germany, who seems to be 300 pounds. These people are not healthy, guys. They're going to call that bigoted somehow, but that's just simply the truth. So here he is telling Joe Rogan in this clip that he's not actually understanding or caring, whichever way you want to look at it, health. What he's pushing is pharmaceutical intervention. And as I said, you should feel as stupid as you made yourself look in this interview. You're not a health professional. You're a pharma professional. We see you. Now here's Kevin McKernan following up to this tweet. Now, again, it's blocked, so I can't see it, on the other part, but this is what he says in response to this tweet. He says, this is a display of asymmetric logic. Right. A very intelligent PhD, who, of course, Peter Hotez will never engage with because he knows he can't win the argument. The point is, he utterly exposes this broken logic. What he's saying is, death 2 weeks after vaccine, according to Hotez and the arguments he's making, is just a coincidence. Now, he already talked about the 14 to 21 day time period where they dump it all back into unvaccinated. That's included there. But the death after 2 weeks is just coincidence. So it must be unvaccinated, right? But people who didn't take an injection, that didn't stop transmission, is assumptive. It's a causative. That's a COVID death. We know it. So That, as he's pointing out, is asymmetric logic. It's not complete. You're basically creating a narrative where the logic that applies on one side does not apply on the other. It's hypocritical, period. Dose response is a Bradford Hill tentative causality. Now, we've already shown you this. We're going to get into this in a minute about the breakdown of how the new science currently is showing you yet again, the more shots you have, the more at risk you are. But don't trust the science, trust the science. Yeah, doesn't make sense, does it? Because both of those things are being said, and one side means one means the other. What I'm saying is continue to engage with the evolving understanding of the scientific literature around this conversation and evolve your opinion based on new information. What they're saying is trust what we're saying and ignore everything else. Now here is Kevin's presentation. It's not too long. I just want to play this for you. I think this is very important. He's breaking down the DNA contamination inside these injections that have been seen in multiple locations around the world by some of the highest level people in this conversation. Doctorates, PhDs, and yet nobody's talking about it outside independent media. It just shows you how really lost and dangerous all of this is. Let's get this lined up. 4:58:45. Now, we've done these a lot. Remember that a lot of people can speak at these. It doesn't mean because they're speaking that it necessarily means that it's correct or however you want to look at it. But every time we know these FDA meetings end up showing things. Why does that not look right? Oh, there it is. Right. This is where we've shown people like Stephen Courage speak up and explain how dangerous these things are. The point is that often the FDA people themselves resign in protest when they go forward with something they don't think is correct. And it happens anyway. So here is Kevin McKernan pointing this stuff out for the FDA, and then they don't care.
Imprinting allow Americans to get a variation of a primary series of Novavax when we change variants. Allocate next-gen funding and reassess trial recruitment criteria to expedite Novavax bringing a pediatric vaccine to market. Remove the regulations of
this SV40 promoter, which was not.
Damn it. I hate the way this jumps. Damn it, I'd have to listen to all that again.
And to my shock, discovered that the expression vectors for the vaccines are still in the vials. I looked at this in over a dozen vials, and it appears that this expression vector is above the EMA guidelines and the FDA guidelines. You can see this in this preprint that's described here. Next slide.
We just showed you that, by the way.
As a refresher, there's two different processes that have been discussed in this BMJ article. The clinical trials were run in process 1, which uses in vitro transcription off of synthetic DNA, but they switched to process 2 for a scale-up, which used E. coli to amplify plasmids, and those plasmids are what still remain in the vials, and were not within the clinical trial. Next slide. This is another depiction of this process. You can see getting plasmids out of these E. coli is a challenge and can sometimes lead to residual plasmids inside the vaccines. Next slide. These are the expression vectors that we discovered on the left in the Pfizer vaccines. They also exist in the Moderna vaccines, but they're a little bit different. The Pfizer vaccines specifically have this SV40 promoter, which was not disclosed in the expression vector map that was given to the FDA, to the EMA. But the expression vector has a 344 base pair promoter with a nuclear localization signal known as this SV40 promoter. Next slide. So we went to verify this by designing quantitative PCR assays that target the spike sequence and the vector sequence. Next slide. And this work demonstrated that with even 1 to 100 dilutions, you could get CTs of 22 for the DNA that's in these vials for the vector, which is not part of what should be in these vials. We did this in triplicate across 8 vials. It's very consistent, and they are over the EMA and the FDA's limits. Next slide. The EMA has a ratiometric limit that looks at RNA to DNA ratios, and you should expect an 11.5 CT offset between the spike and between the vector. What we see is only 5 to 7 CT difference, which means there's an 18 to 70 fold over the limit of the 330 nanogram per milligram recommended by the EMA. Next slide. You can readily assay this in any other lab around the world now. If you put these vaccines directly into quantitative PCR, you can get CTs as low as 17. This is very important to know because COVID was diagnosed with CTs less than 40, which is over a million-fold higher contamination being injected than what you might get from a nasal swab. Next slide. We know these vials were sent to us anonymously in the mail, so we do not have the cold chain. However, we can measure the RNA integrity by putting them on electrophoresis systems, and we do not see a substantial difference in the RNA integrity from the vials that we received versus what's been published about these in the past.
There's an important point to make here. First of all, you should fair to argue that seeing as how there was somebody sent these who clearly, I mean, we would assume works with the industry and is concerned but doesn't want to be fired, so sends these out to somebody like him to be able to discuss it. But that could be fake, right? We can't prove that it is exactly the same thing. But what is happening is other places around the world are confirming the same research, which we already talked about. But the main point is about the expiration. That, one of these, like it's like the new Z-Dog MD kind of nonsense people that are just out there debunking the narratives for the government when we can prove that they're half the time completely wrong, but they're just trusting the science like a good scientist should, or how they tell you. This Debunk the Funk is one of these people out there who comes out and says, oh, it's expired. You're falling for the same trick. Well, he goes into it right here and explains why that's not a problem. But if you want to argue what he says here is fake, go ahead. But they're not even engaging with his explanation of it. They're just going, expired, fake news, move along. Next
slide. Various people on Twitter have now begun to reproduce this. In addition, I'd point to the EMA's documentation where they have an 815-fold variance across 10 lots of double-stranded DNA contamination documented in the EMA process. Next slide. There are some risks to this. There's double-stranded DNA can create interferon responses, and Keith Pettin at the FDA has done great work demonstrating the risks of DNA integration into the genome if these things are in vaccines. Next slide. The call to action here is all of these primer sequences are now public and people are downloading them and trying to reproduce this work. You can reproduce this work in 60 minutes with a microliter of the vaccine, which is 1/300th of a dose for less than $10. I encourage everyone to try and do this to understand what we have at foot. I will note we did not measure any of the bad lots that are in the Schmeling et al. Paper that demonstrated high adverse events in certain lots. We were measuring what seemed to be normal lots. Next slide. And thank you for your time and consideration.
Great. Thank you.
I think it's important what he's showing you guys. So I've shown you the studies in the past. Oh, and then the last one was this one, just very quickly. This is very interesting to me.
Mr. McKernan, for your presentation.
This is the same point we were making before about the admission. What is it? 60556. About it's the same guy asking the same question, by the way, about correlative of protection.
Over to you, Dr. Monta.
Thank you, Dr. Weir. Very comprehensive and clear presentation to put us ready for our later discussion after we have some questions. And I see Dr. Levy has his hand raised.
Thank you for that efficient review, Dr. Weir. A lot of information you're taking into account. This topic has been brought up several times before, but what is FDA's current view of what the correlative protection is to protect against coronavirus infection and disease? Is there any position of FDA in terms of asking sponsors moving forward to collect more T-cell data? Do you want in future meetings to be summarizing those kind of data?
3.5 years in, and we're still only focusing on antibody response, not T-cell, not RB, because it's not happening. There is no there's no mucosal immunity even taking place. 3.5 years. They know this, guys. We're being lied to.
As well, these are questions for you as you summarize immunogenicity considerations. Thank you.
Okay, so to take them one at a time, I'm not sure that there is a unified view of correlates of protection.
Great. So everyone makes up their own opinion of it, and we all just get to shuffle them, but they tell you safe and effective no matter what. How can there not be a static correlative of protection? If you get this kind of response, that equals this kind of protection because you're being experimented on.
I think you've seen the data that's been presented that in general, neutralizing antibody correlates with protection. That
in general
does not mean that there is some threshold that we can identify that says that this level you are protected.
You know what that means? We don't know. Make sure you understand that. We don't know. So just because you're producing an antibody response doesn't mean that it's actually protecting you. That's what this very same guy said the last time. And again, they go, well, obviously we don't have a full understanding of the way this vaccine works. That's what they actually said before. We're still there.
Most of those studies were done early in infection when not Omicron. When Wuhan and Wuhan-like viruses circulated, whatever the correlates of protection were then are probably not the same as they are now.
But I guess we just go forward anyway. So we're using Wuhan data when they're telling you it's so different, we need entirely new injections. And yet pretending that the correlate of protection that they had in the beginning is the same, or at least that it's safe and protective, safe and effective now. There's nothing about this that's honest or scientific, guys. We are being manipulated. It's just right on the surface. And that's why people that are experts and willing to be honest about this are screaming at the top of their lungs.
As I mentioned in one slide, I think correlates of protection for antibody probably almost assuredly vary from platform to platform.
Oh, great. So now we don't even know based on between individual injections. But don't they just blanket say they're all safe and effective? How does that make sense?
Again, today at this meeting, we're using neutralizing antibody as a measure for something that informs strain selection.
Ah, great. Great. So all the FDA cares about is making sure we identify the best strain that we can focus on. Is that what they're supposed to be doing? I thought they were supposed to be keeping you safe. I guess that's secondary, if at all, on the table.
Ideally, of course, one would love a correlate of protection that one could point to and flash up a slide that says it's this level of antibody, or it's.
You see, the point is, guys, you could argue all this makes sense with a pandemic and that we're operating at the speed of science, whatever that stupid statement means. Fine, good. I would go, fine, that's great, until you start forcing it on people. So all of this is a conversation becomes relevant when you realize that from the beginning until now, they're still pressuring people, even though they barely understand if that's even the reality of the situation.
This level of something else. I don't think we're there yet. Although, again, a lot of people have different opinions about that.
Great. So 3 years in and we're still debating this stuff. How do you think that makes safe and effective?
I think the second part of your question was, how do we feel about T-cell analysis? I would love to be standing here next year and telling you that we have more information about.
Oh, good. So just give it another year, and then we'll maybe understand if it gives you full immunity. Meanwhile, natural immunity has continued to show lasting, durable, and robust T-cell memory B and antibody production in most people that have never even had the virus. Work that out for yourself. That's a peer-reviewed study, but fake news. Here he is saying this all the way back then. We already showed you this before.
How should we think of micrograms in terms of the amount of spike protein that's produced by the cells? Can you kind of clarify that?
Obviously, we don't have a complete understanding of the nature of the way that the vaccine works in terms of producing immune response.
That's actually the wrong one, but that one's still important. So he's admitting there that we don't even fully understand how it translates into the immune response. We just simply see an immune response. That's in their own documentation. He literally said it on the record. Here's the same person asking in one of these earlier meetings years ago, like it was a year and a half ago or so, a year ago, it's bivalent.
And then can you repeat the second question?
I mean, obviously you have a lot of data now. What is your correlative protection is? Everybody's measuring antibodies. They're probably relevant, but as we know...
That's a long question. We need a quick answer.
And he gets cut off, of course.
I would say there is no established correlate of protection.
So the point is, what he got cut off in saying was everyone's measuring antibody response, but he's going to go on to make a point to say, well, we know natural immunity includes T-cell. They all know this stuff, guys. It's just amazing that we're being misled from the top. Now, in the interest of time, I want to show you a couple of things. The videos we can play later. But Dr. Peter McCullough put this out recently about discussing about whether the spike, actually, I will play this one. It's a shorter one about whether the spike protein leaves your body. All right. So realizing what they're talking about, these injections, that's what they're putting in your body and telling you, well, we don't even know how it works properly. We see a response. Well, is that response simply producing spike proteins that later go on to hurt you? That's correct.
So the spike proteins, are they there forever once they're in your body?
Work by Bruce Patterson at IncelDX is the best work we have available. In severe COVID, people hospitalized, he was able to find the S1 segment stuck in white blood cells for 15 months after the infection. After the vaccinated, he's been able to find the full-length spike protein, the S1 and the S2 segment, again stuck in white blood cells for at least 9 months. But that's as long as he's looked. A paper from Stanford, from Roken and colleagues, has found the messenger RNA, which is the genetic code for the spike protein, stuck in lymph nodes at 2 months, but that's as long as they've looked. So I can tell you, both the messenger RNA and the spike protein are long-lasting in the human body, probably months, if not years.
God, it's just so insulting. right? I mean, we've talked about this exact conversation so many times about whether it's the mRNA or the spike protein and how, yeah, they very clearly do end up in your blood and your body in general. But yet the Red Cross continues to argue that they don't label these because it doesn't go in your bloodstream. That's still what they're arguing to this day. So you must understand, these are bodies that do not care about the science. That's the level we're at. There's no debating the peer-reviewed science up to 28 days in this one. mRNA sequences circulating your body. We found spike protein in every body. We found lipid nanoparticles in almost every organ. These people are pathetically hiding from what they're doing. They're killing people. At the very least, they're hurting people. At the very least, they're lying to people. Nobody seems to care. He's pointing out, Dr. McCullough, that we should reject mRNA in livestock because genetic veterinary vaccines not needed. Transference to humans has not been ruled out. I think it's a very important thing we have to continue to study. Now, here's a presentation at the Better Way Conference where she's making this exact point. This is something that we need to consider.
Could this occur with livestock that's vaccinated with this technology? And could that possibly affect humans? And it's not a trivial question because we actually know that drugs, vaccines, for instance, are withdrawn from animals nearly a month after vaccination. They're withdrawn in the sense that animals cannot be used for human consumption if a month hasn't gone by. And again, I remind you that the information we have in terms of biodistribution is based on mice. And humans and other animals, including livestock, have very different metabolisms, much slower metabolisms. So this can actually affect how long these vaccines will persist in livestock. We don't know that. And the Codex Alimentarius, the World Health Organization, the FAO, they all have very specific and very strict views in terms of carryover of drugs for humans.
This is really
It's very important to understand the pharmacokinetics of these agents that they're putting. That is actually their words, not mine. And despite that, not a single study on the minimum aspect of toxicity and aspects of pharmacokinetics have been carried out for these vaccines in livestock in terms of how that can impact humans.
I mean, just so you understand what she's saying, everything before this, before COVID-19, of course, COVID-19 vaccine changed everything, right? The point is that before this, they were very clear barriers and timeframes about after injections, where they said, well, we can't just use we have to let a time pass before we're allowed to harvest them for meat, let's say. So they know this stuff, right? But somehow magically during COVID-19 land, this is somehow misinformation, fake news. Well, the science is clearly there. They're the ones that set these metrics. Now suddenly this doesn't apply. I mean, the only way you can wrap that into your mind is when you realize for some crazy reason, they want this to end up in your body. I mean, that's the way I would look at this, but you explain for me how they can just pretend and somehow the entire industry can just magically forget that they've always had these standards. There's something so incredibly nefarious in all of this when we can see that people are being scared into silence.
Not a single one. So very similar to what happened for these vaccines, the COVID vaccines in humans that are actually paraded as they have very high levels of safety. We have done very limited studies in terms of biodistribution. Most studies have been done in mouse models. As I said, these are not valid. In terms of interactions with cellular samples of foreign material, genetic material, only 2 studies have been done in human cells in vitro. And we have absolutely no information in terms of the stability and persistence of these products in milk and in meat and the possibility of transfer towards humans. So I hope that what was actually posted on a website on animal health doesn't happen. I hope we don't eradicate animal health. I hope we don't eradicate animals. This is actually something that's quite serious. And I'm going to finish my presentation with some words, a quote by William Lawrence, a conservation biologist, who says, "We're like a 2-year-old playing with fire. We're messing around with something really dangerous and we don't really understand what will happen." That is the way we are, the position we're in at now with these vaccines, this technology for livestock. And I thank you for your attention.
Well, think about the very alarming overlap of the same thing being said about the transgender movement. And that coming from some of the leading experts saying whether we're building the plane while flying it. Weirdly, in this completely separate conversation, the same thing's happening. Yeah, because it's pretty clear to me that this is not separate. However you want to hear that. There's so much going on. This is something much larger. Dr. Peter McCullough is also pointing out that Australia is trying to use lumpy skin disease as a theoretical future threat to cattle in order to usher in mRNA vaccines. So you see my point? They're just manufacturing reasons to do this. There's something wrong here. when the traditional ones, as he says, works fine. You can disagree with that. Either way, the rationale is that we need it now. He calls for a ban on all of these. Bernie's tweets points out, again, these are the things that they're pointing at new theoretical future diseases to justify where we're going. Well, weirdly, same time, the UK, world's deadliest diseases are coming to the UK because of climate change. You know, the non-distinguishable changes in temperature they claim are completely catastrophic that are somehow managing to create new viruses. It's just so irrationally illogical. Mosquitoes and ticks carrying viruses, you know, most of which were completely engineered by the government, which we can literally prove. Look up Plum Island and the government research on actually using ticks as carriers of bioweapons. But, you know, we're conspiracy theorists because people who hear that will never look into the obvious provable evidence that's coming directly from their own websites. But, you know, fake news. They're saying, oh my God, death rates will be up to 50%. What will be? This weird, hypothetical, undefinable thing that will come tomorrow? This is unbelievable fear-mongering. Her point is they're warning of the world's deadliest diseases because climate change. Well, here's Miriam, the bee lady, pointing something important out. How many of you have heard about the Global Virome Project? Discover Spillover, the first of its kind open source tool to evaluate risk and rank newly discovered wildlife viruses in terms of their zoonotic spillover and pandemic potential. I wonder if this will play a prominent role in going, it's about to happen. We discovered a new one that's going to be out tomorrow. Oh, and by the way, ever heard of these groups that seem to work and fund them? Oh, look at that. USAID, a classic false flag, Trojan horse operation. Say this on the record. These people have said they do today what the CIA used to do in clandestine fashion 50 years ago. That's an open statement by people at the USAID. That's what they do. This is regime change tactics. They are not honest from the core level of what their mandate is. We also just talked with Dr. Peter McCullough about the endocrine disrupting chemicals, the overlap of the COVID injection being one of them. Not hard to prove. Dioxins, PFAS, hormones in your food, all of these things based on the science, the peer-reviewed science that I showed in this article or this study or in this show, in some cases, without doubt, is causing gender dysphoria. So you can verifiably say that in some cases, the chemicals in our food, water, and air, the COVID injections, what they're doing to your food, all of this is leading to causing the very thing they then called gender dysphoria, which they then use to push the next agenda. Kanoa the Great points out, a confidential Pfizer document dated August 2022 shows the company observed 1.6 million adverse events covering nearly every organ system. Great post. Here's the actual article. They're pharmacovigilance documents, which you can read for yourself. They're linked right in this document. They found 508,000 individual cases of adverse events containing over 1.5 million events. 1/3 of them were classified as serious. Interesting that we're not told about this, right? The point is, this is the same as pointing at this study, or the one I showed earlier. Oh, I think I already closed it. But the point was that 36% increase. Or, you know, I mean, this is a good example as well, that their own trial showed you a 36% increase in risk just by taking the injection. That's what this is actually about. They knew this. They covered it up. Here's the document. If you want to comb through it for yourself, you'll be surprised if you think we're lying. Dr. Claire Craig points out the FDA knew that there had been total vaccine failure against infection, which is what the EUA was for in September 2021. Think what happened afterwards. Vaccine passports, no jab, no job, aimed at your kids. None were justified. The point is they knew this. Same point. Wittgenstein points out, baffling. We're so confused. Heart disease soars 13,000% among the vaccinated. This is CDC data, guys. Read it for yourself. But we're baffled, though. We're baffled about why. You mean baffled that the injection data that we just discussed literally shows an increase in cardiac problems, but then we're confused about how that represents as cardiac problems in those that take the injections? I mean, that's called willful ignorance. Oh, and here's an example of that not happening at all. You think Macron doesn't see that? Look, the only way you don't acknowledge that happening is when you're somehow primed to ignore it. A person collapsing, especially somebody who's trained to be a guard like this that doesn't even move, like in England, that's a shocking thing to see. And not only that, they immediately drag him to the side because he's collapsing. Now, yeah, you could argue he's tired. You could argue he's dehydrated. I'm sure they've said all of that. But in a time when we've never seen more of this happening live on random clips like this, we need to realize that something's going on. Now, Chief Nerd points out another study that backs up what we were just talking about. The reality from June 12th, 2023. Yes, on preprint. The CDC is recently defined being up to date, which, by the way, it's a story in and of itself. We've told you throughout this whole process this was going to keep happening, right? 1 shot, 2 shot, 3 shot, 4, 5, 6, 7. You're not up to date until you get what we tell you is up to date. So they just move the bar from being fully vaccinated to just whatever we say is currently up to date, right? So what they said is they've redefined that now. So now, as we told you they would, being at least 1 bivalent. You mean the bivalent shot? The bivalent shot that they've also realized by the BMJ that is completely dangerous? They don't care. You need that one too, apparently. The purpose of the study was to compare the risk of COVID-19 among those up to date to those not up to date. Now, of course, you compare this to people not vaccinated at all, and it would be even more obvious, and we'll show you that one next. The point, though, is obviously they found what you might expect. The cumulative incidence of COVID-19 was, in fact, lower in the people that weren't up to date. Now, you could argue that's because the bivalent was super dangerous. Well, if that's the case, then why are they still pushing it? Not being up to date with COVID vaccine was associated with a lower risk of COVID. So the less injections, the lower the risk. Results were very similar in those over 65, who they claim up to date needed 2 bivalent shots. My God, this is about as ridiculous as it gets. This is the one we recently showed you, right? This is June 2023, the one that came out as a preprint, and they all screamed as a preprint, and now has been peer-reviewed, and now they pretend it's not there. Because that's trusting the science, right? The risk of COVID-19 was increased with time since the most recent shot, but also with the number of vaccine doses previously received. You just can't misunderstand that. In general, the more you take, the higher the risk, a net harm. To stop 1 hospitalization, this is actually higher. I take it back. I thought the numbers were different. He was saying 20,000 RFK. That 31 to 42,000 people need to get 3 shots. Okay, maybe I forget what he was saying, 1 or 2. Either way, it's the same discussion. Upwards of 42,000 kids need to get 3 different shots to stop 1 hospitalization, which will cause almost 19 serious adverse events. And that is what you call a net harm. Do not use them. You know that your own study showed you a 36% increase, and we're being lied to about it. We know that a peer-reviewed study from 2022 found everything we're seeing. That yes, it causes sustained synthesis of the spike protein. The lie, they said that doesn't happen. Yes, it's neurotoxic and impairs DNA mechanisms. Yes, that's happening. They said it wasn't. Vaccines potentially cause increased risk of infectious diseases. They increase your risk of illness. Their own data shows this. All of this stuff is true. And yet, the European Union is today recommending these injections for kids under 5 years old. You just can't make sense of that unless there's something really, really wrong here. The Supreme Court of Canada is not even hearing a case of a dying person because they're unvaccinated. They've been denied an organ transplant, which is why they're dying. Or they were struggling anyway, but now they're in a place to get it, and they won't even hear the case because they're unvaccinated. This is where we're at. These are the moral people, right? The science, the technocrat. These are the ones you should listen to. No, these are disgusting, terrible, bad people who are letting somebody die because of their smug, petty perspective or because they're too dumb to realize they're wrong. And at the same time, guys, as we just showed you, the FDA advisors are now raising doubts about the seasonal version they want to go in. How much you want to bet it happens anyway, just like every other time. Here's the last couple points I want to make on this. Realize that this is an information, information coming out from within the UK discussion. We already know this, by the way. This has already been shown by other discussions, but you can read this. What they're saying is, we told you needed to do all these things, social distancing, wearing a mask, but within their own offices, number 10, we didn't do it. It wasn't enforced. It says whether we should be wearing masks was told that the science advice there was no point, and it had very little effect on the spread of COVID. So as the UK was screaming you were going to go to prison if you didn't, they were going, it doesn't really matter. We already know this, though. We already caught them. And then it even goes on to say to be mindful of the cameras outside, and we also saw that, where they would pretend to put the mask on, right? This is as clear as it gets. Now, last point, as Wittgenstein points something out. New COVID vaccine funded by Microsoft. Skycovion. was just approved. Now, I want to make a point to just demonstrate our value on the way out. If you've been watching this show, this was posted on the 17th. Not from Wittgenstein, but from the corporate media / independent. This is now circulating the conversation in the last couple of days. Had you been watching The Last American Vagabond, you would have heard about this on the 9th. That's it. That we're ahead of the story, that we are always doing our due diligence and cutting these things out long before they're even allowed to be discussed. Oh, damn it. I put sane, son of a gun. Now, the point, though, is that we are always going after this stuff, guys. And if you support this platform, we will do our best to keep you informed long before these things even trickle through the independent media. We're in a bad way, but we are making strides. We are taking strides in the direction of truth. And it's because of you guys. So thank you for being here, and thank you for continuing to fight for us, because we will continue to fight for you. As always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.